Hello and welcome, and thanks for joining us tonight. And if you're online joining us, we're glad you could be here. I'm going to be speaking to you out of Revelation chapter 12, and the subject is holy war. Revelation 12 has been one of my favorite passages through the years as far as teaching, because there's probably no passage of the Bible that is more explicit about the inability of our enemy to accomplish the task. And boy, do we need that right now. Yes, sir. Say it again. The inability of our enemy to defeat us, to conquer us, to destroy the witness of Jesus, to destroy the work of God. So that's what we're dealing with Holy War, Revelation chapter 12. You guys have been with me. You know the outline. You know that I always reintroduce the fact that this is where we're in the sanctions section, and we're finally moving towards the end of it. And so 7 seals and 7 trumpets, they are parallel expressions of the judgment on Jerusalem. One of the things that I haven't removed myself from is the conviction that there is repetition in the book, and that the repetition refers to the same thing. The holy city, as we already saw last week, has become Sodom and Egypt. And as you will see as we progress, in other words, the wife had become a harlot and not a bride. And what we're seeing is the putting away of the old covenant in favor of the new covenant. I don't think I've ever been more stirred up about how all this imagery impacts us and how relevant it is to what's going on in our world. Dealing with a number of things. As I'm watching the reaction in the church to all of the prophets that had prophesied about the election, and that is leading to questions about how do we view America? How do we view what God's doing in the world? And when you're studying Revelation, looking back, looking at the present, this stuff presses in on us. And, one of the things and I just want to share this is kind of an aside, but there's a whole lot of questions being asked about the nature of God's relationship to nations. And so I'm getting inquiries myself because I have always maintained that there are not national covenants. And that in fact, what we're looking at in Revelation is the laying aside of national covenants, and I would say once and for all. And in favor of the kingdom, which is a multinational, multiracial, thank you. It's Christian globalism, that the kingdom of God is God's rule and reign over people in every nation, language, and tongue. It is God's holy people. And literally, I am dealing with this in the sense that God really did have a covenant with a nation, and that Jesus had pronounced judgment, and that this is the unpacking of that. One of the things that's interesting is, because I didn't know how deeply riven into the American consciousness there is that Americans feel that we have a unique and special covenant with God. And that because people who were original settlers or I should say original colonial settlers. Because they invoked the name of God, they therefore established a covenant. And what I've been maintaining with people is that if there's a covenant that has been established, it would go like this. It's a man-sided covenant. And I actually want to say to people, you don't really want to maintain that you have bound God to a covenant with a nation, because you don't really want to invoke God's judgment on your nation. And so I have a lot of thinking that I'm doing on that. You know, apparently also this thought has been strong inside of people for a while. And so I think it lives inside of the idea of manifest destiny. And it lives inside the idea that if America had a covenant with God, then it had a divine right to displace indigenous peoples. Oh, wow. Now, all those questions are fomenting 400 years later in our nation, and they are front and center. So, with that little warm introduction, here we go into this passage. So where are we? It's when we were at chapter 11, and that was just so fascinating to me. We saw that Israel is under judgment, and we saw that John is like Ezekiel, being given the word of God, and he has the sweet and bitter experience of it. We saw the true temple was safe, and the outer temple is trampled. In other words, what we're seeing in this text and what we're going to see tonight is the play between God's protection of his people and God's judgment on a people. We saw Moses and Elijah as the two witnesses, or if you will, Jesus's constant invocation to the people of Israel that they had the law and the prophets and that they had every opportunity of receiving them and did not. We saw the judgment on Jerusalem, as I've already mentioned, and now it's being equated with Sodom and Egypt. Later, it's been called the Great City, like 3 times it'll be called that in the corpus, and ultimately it'll be called Babylon. We see the witnesses rise after 3.5 days. So we're going to see this 3.5 image come up, the broken 7. We'll see it in terms of a period of intense tribulation, and then we see it in this way in a period of the condensed version of 3.5 days. And that this is the testimony from the transition of old to new. The 7th trumpet blows, and I had a lot of fun with that. And all this is review, so if you're having a hard time keeping up, you'll have to go back through the other things. The 7th trumpet has blown, and that 7th trumpet declares Jesus is King of Kings and Lord of Lords, that he's on his throne and that new creation has come. The missing Ark of the Covenant is found. It's in the heavens where Jesus is. He's reigning in the heavens over the earth. All that was 11. In fact, that thing still blew up in me that I had to preach it again on Sunday morning. And that led me to this and to the investigations that I did into Tishri 1, and remember, I pointed out that literally the 7th trumpet in the course of a Jewish year is Tishri 1, which is also Rosh Hashanah. And so it's the 7th month of the liturgical year, the 1st month of the what we would call the civil year, and I did point out that Rosh Hashanah is not in the Bible, but comes to us later. All these things I pointed out. All that was in a previous sermon, but I wanted to bring it back up because I'm intrigued by some of this. There's some question as to whether the book of Revelation actually dates for us the birth of Jesus. The one thing that we do know that's being done on purpose is that we are being told of the inauguration of the King of Kings. And I think, do I have this here? No, I'm not going to do that one. Yeah, here. We're at a midpoint, so catch this. Outliners, people who love outlines. Chapter 1 through 11 is the victory of Christ. And that's why it ends with his enthronement, his announcement, the worship in heaven, and then his glory. I like this. Chapter 12 to 22 can be classified as the victory of his bride. And therefore, in some sense, there is some recapitulating of the meta-narratives while we're continuing to pound through what the awful historic moment that they're in. All right. All that is introduction. A great sign and another great sign. So if you have a Bible, Revelation 12, 1 and 2. And a great sign appeared in heaven. A woman clothed with the sun and the moon under her feet, and on her head a crown of 12 stars. She was pregnant and crying out in birth pains in the agony of giving birth. Get ready for some fun on this. And another sign appeared in heaven. Behold, a great red dragon, 7 heads and 10 horns, and on his heads 7 diadems. And his tail swept down 1/3 of the stars of heaven and cast them to the earth. I want you to see, first of all, the great sign. Now, so we have a great sign and another sign. But the great sign is the woman. Now, who is this woman? I want you to know that without any question, this woman is a composite of covenantal womanhood through the scriptures. She is old covenant Israel. She, by the way, she bears the image of her husband, who, when we see the Lord, what do we get? The image of the sun, the image of the moon, the image of the stars. We get these things wrapped up in the picture of who the Lord is. We see she's with child, the child, who in this passage will be the warrior king. She's Eve. She's Sarah. She's Mary. In fact, you can go through all the barren women of the Old Testament. You can put them on there. She is this. And never made this connection before, but it's an obvious one. How did I miss it? She is the sign given. Remember our passage in Isaiah as we're studying through the book of Isaiah, and the prophet says, ask for a sign. Make it a big one. Ask for a sign. She's the sign that's given. Now, do I have it next? Yeah. Okay, note. I'm just give it to you now and then go to it. A speculative date for the birth of Christ could be, guess what? 9/11, 3 BC. Don't get the prophecy pundits of today on that one. They'll find some fun with that one. This is when, that would be the date when all of these indicators converge. Note, if you want to have some fun, you can go online, you can look up Ernest L. Martin, The Birth of Christ Recalculated. Don't try to buy the book, it's $400. But there's some PDF stuff online if you want to go plowing through it. And those of you who are scientific, because I'm going to botch this because it's not easy to get. But let's think about the sign. Okay, The word sign is the same word that's often used to signify the zodiac. The ancients had no problem with convergences between the signs of the zodiac and the gospel message. And many times through history, teachers and preachers have used the zodiac to declare the gospel. So the 12 signs of the zodiac were often used as symbols of the tribes of Israel. And they're symbolized in Joseph's dream of the sun, the moon, and the 7 stars in Genesis 37. Now, because this sign, notice what we just had. We just had 7th trumpet. 7th trumpet signified for us Tishri 1. Well, Tishri 1 is September, is Virgo. A pregnant virgin. Imagine that. People smarter than me and people who understand things I don't understand have actually calculated the image of the idea of the woman clothed with the sun, with the moon under her feet, and have calculated the stars as to when that could potentially have been. And they've been able to calculate that the ideal moment actually happened in 9/11, 3 BC. Now, it's not inconceivable to me with all these things. It's actually quite fascinating. This is a Perry Stone episode, if you would, and old Perry would have a field day with this stuff, the way he likes to work on these things. But so catch this. We're in the book of Revelation. He's brought us to the 7th trumpet. He's brought us to the destruction of Jerusalem. The 12th chapter, everybody has always known this. This is a recapitulation. Now suddenly we're going back, and we're going to get redemption history fed back to us, and then we're going to go back through. So this is Revelation 12 is a nightmare for people who look at the linear unfolding of the book. As I have often stated, the book doesn't unfold literally, and the signs don't let you look at it linearly. I said literal or linear. Doesn't let it be linear. It lets it be layered. As I've said before, cycled, but I kind of like layered better, because when you say cycled, I've discovered it calls up all kinds of literal images of cycles. And I don't want to do that. Okay. So you understand this strange idea, this strange notion that I'm giving you. By the way, some people have asked and have speculated on why December 25th is used for the birth of Christ. And a lot of people connect it to paganism, but using the same kinds of figuring that brought this guy to this construction would lead you to something more like the visit of the Magi being more around the 25th of December. So, in other words, this stuff has been calculated by people at various times. Now, so we would be announcing the King of Kings and remembering both his birth and his enthronement in this moment. Listen, Jesus is the center of the thing. And until we get back to Jesus being the center of things, we're going to be messed up anyway. And frankly, until we in our politics get back to Jesus being the center of things, we're going to be messed up as Christians, hung up on politics. Why are we at a moment in our history where Christian brothers and sisters are stuck arguing the pronouncements of prophets rather than fortifying ourselves for discipleship in a moment of change, dramatic change? Because this is where we are. And I want you to know that the identification of Jesus with a body politic is always destructive and is never conducive to the witness of Jesus. But the identification of his servants with him and in wonderful service to Jesus. I can't go down the trail. I'm going to be tempted to go on. Another sign, a great red dragon. 3 kinds of dragons in the Bible: Leviathan, Rahab, and Tannin. Each of them are associated with serpentine imagery. We immediately are learning we're dealing with the enemy. I'll have more to say about Leviathan next week and with a greater clarity than you've heard before. But here's what we got. The great sign: a woman great with child, and a dragon hovered over her, ready to devour the child. What is that picture? That picture is the story of the whole Bible. That picture is the story of the Bible from Genesis 3 all the way to the cross. What's it the picture of? It's the picture of the fact that at the fall of Adam and Eve, God declared there would be an enmity, a war between the seed of the woman and the seed of the serpent. The seed of the woman being the biological lineage of the one who would come to deal with the problem. And the seed of the serpent being the serpent's inspired offspring. I want to point that out because I'm always fascinated when we always want to be literal. And here's a word that's used in 2 ways, same word. One is to use actual biological lineage, and the other one is to the inspired lineage. That is to say, those who embody and do the work of the serpent. But that's just a small picture of it. And I always notice that we're halfway through Genesis before we get anywhere. And I didn't even I did put Abimelech in there because Sarah's nearly raped twice. One of them would have been Genesis 20. Each of those incidents a threat to the integrity of the seed. By the way, when you're talking about covenant, the covenant story of the Bible, its actual story centers upon our redemption. It centers upon the story of the necessity and the coming of Christ to do his work. When we then take that image and we put that on, not the church. See, what people are doing now with this idea of covenant, they're not putting it on the church where it properly belongs, but putting it on a nation. History is a consistent witness that when people identify their nation as the people of God in some exclusive way, that will always end tragically. But when God's people are identified with their relationship to his son, we have an increasing kingdom. All right. So we saw the great sign and another sign, and this is the battle that's there. Revelation 12:4, and the dragon stood before the woman who was about to give birth, so that when she bore the child, he might devour it. Satan goes about like a roaring lion, seeking whom he may devour. a similar but not the same word. She gave birth to a male child, one who's to rule all nations with a rod of iron. But the child was caught up to God and to his throne. And the woman fled into the wilderness, where she has a place prepared by God, where she's to be nourished 1,260 days. What's going on there? A whole lot. Let's unpack it. The dragon, the devourer, that just speaks of the war between the seed of the woman and the seed of the serpent. And this is the crowning moment. This is, let's just say this is Herod. That birth moment, the dragon was embodied by Herod, who would have destroyed the child. Her child will rule with an iron scepter. All through the scriptures, we're told about this child that's going to be a ruler. This child is born, and the way we're given it, the child is born and ascends immediately to the throne. In other words, the writer says, this is what we're going to tell. The child gets born, he fulfills his purpose, he's enthroned. The picture of the time frame reminds us of Elijah and of Elijah's flight from Jezebel, and of Elijah's time in the wilderness being nourished and protected. And his messengers care for her. This is God's wonderful protective care given. You'll see more about that. I'm finding myself trying to, I really have too much to say tonight. It's part of the problem. All right, you got this? This image is not hard. I think there's one thing I want to reiterate with you that I don't have on a slide up there. That I have on a slide here. We're in the period of the book of Revelation where this image is given in various ways. We are given the 42 months, the 1,260 days, and the times, time, and a half time. That's a symbolic period of time. It's a very significant number. I think I mentioned last week that it's reflective of the 42 wilderness years and the 42 encampments of Israel and the 42 generations waiting for a Redeemer, that it's always this symbolic time of a time of testing, waiting for redemption. And it's the broken seven. All right, it means tribulation. It means tribulation. It's not without suggestiveness that the period of Israel's actual tribulation, 66 to 70, was 3.5 years. So if you need a literal hook, it's there. A lot of times the Bible does not give us exactitude when it uses symbols, and I could illustrate that especially with the significance of Elijah and the rain, and how it's variously reported as 3 years and also as 3.5 years. But it's the idea of tribulation. And I don't want you to miss that what I'm suggesting to you is that what Revelation is actually talking about in the immediate is the tribulation that comes upon Israel in the Roman wars. But I'm going to tell you tonight that it's also suggestive of our persecution, or the persecution that the body of Christ can expect. So I did that. All right. Now this is hard for folks, and it's actually not that easy for me. because we read, now war arose in heaven. And Michael and his angels were fighting against the dragon. And the dragon and his angels fought back. But he was defeated. And there was no longer any place for them in heaven. And the great dread dragon was thrown down. That ancient serpent who is called the devil and Satan, the deceiver of the whole world, he was thrown down, and his angels thrown down with him. The word thrown down is the action part of the verb, is the same verb when demons are cast out, which is ekbalo. This is the balo. And we already had the picture of protect the temple, but the outer part is cast out. So if you will, we had Israel being cast out of God's protection. And here we have Satan and his angels being cast out. And of course, this is kind of just like there are 2 or 3 times in the book of Revelation, it just won't let you not know. It says, okay, we're going to call this Sodom and Egypt, the city where Jesus was crucified. It won't let you not know. We're talking about Jerusalem. When we come to the child, it won't let you know. It won't let you not think anything other than we're talking about Jesus. When we come to this, he's like, you're going to know we're talking about the devil. Now, this war, don't miss this. This is not a devil-initiated war. This is a God-initiated war. This is a Michael and his angels fighting against the dragon. So when war broke out in heaven, what does that mean? We have the picture of the child comes, he's born. We're not told about his death. We're told about his ascension and his enthronement. And war breaks out. He's the initiator of the war. And the dragon and his angels fought back, defeated, no place for them. This is Matthew 16:18. The gates of hell shall not prevail, which is to say, it's not God's people who are under assault. It's the devil's power that's under assault. It's not to say the devil won't, as it says here, fight back. But the one who initiated the war is none other than the Lord himself. Now, in this case, it's actually said Michael. And the last time I went through the book of Revelation, I did point out that just like with the great angel here, we have this interesting thing that Michael is often considered in this passage to be the Lord himself. In fact, some of the same people who would suggest to you that this was the Lord being revealed under the banner of the warrior Michael would also point out that the associations with the angel of the Lord and the associations with the so-called archangel, and even to say that the shout of the archangel is the Lord himself. Now, here's where I am on that. I don't know, but I know this. If the Lord gives an angel a command, this thing gets done. And but we do know that the one who actually defeated Satan is the Lord himself. So Michael can be identified with Jesus. The serpent and his angels are thrown down, and this causes us to rethink Satan. So I'm going to give you some verses. I don't have them up there on the slide. let's rethink Satan's power. First of all, 2 Corinthians 4:4. The God of this world has blinded the minds of unbelievers to keep them from seeing the light of the gospel. Okay, so Satan is called the God of this world. What happens when Jesus comes? It now is possible for people who couldn't see to see. Before Jesus came into the world, all the nations and all the world lay in blindness. After Jesus came into the world, they were told to go to all the nations and make disciples because it's now possible for them to see. John 12:31, now is the judgment of this world. Now is the ruler of the world cast out. John 14:30, I will no longer talk much to you, for the ruler of this world is coming. He has no claim on me. This is Jesus before his crucifixion. John 16:11, concerning judgment, because the ruler of this world is judged. So I'm going to suggest, I'm not new suggesting it, that when people like to say, they like to explain this world by saying that Satan is the God of this world. He's the defeated God of this world. And we are empowered. We are enabled. And this is why, rethink it again. We're not dependent on political champions to get the kingdom of God established or to keep things safe. In fact, mostly God gets his kingdom done by not letting his people be safe. I always say we're saved, but we're not safe. I always say we're conquerors, but we're going to die. We are victors, but sometimes we'll be the victims of the injustices of the world. But we don't have to be afraid. So here we go. War. And then, so I'm saying to you, this is speaking of something that already happened. We're not looking for this to happen. And Jesus prophesied it and declared it when they cast out demons. I don't think, Lord, even the demons are subject to us in your name. And he said to them, I saw Satan fall like lightning. Behold, I've given you authority to tread on serpents and scorpions, and over the power of the enemy, nothing shall hurt you. It's intentional that he uses the imagery of serpents and scorpions. By the way, people who use zodiac imagery to preach the gospel speak about the interplay between Virgo and Scorpio. I don't have the knowledge on understanding all that, but go dig it up and have some fun. The heavens declare the glory of God, so don't be afraid of that stuff. I'm not telling you to become, what's the word? That. I'm telling you to expect to see God declared everywhere and in everything. Don't be afraid. And when Jesus says, I saw Satan fall like lightning, I don't think that has to give us a time frame as if to say the disciples by their actions themselves cast Satan out. But I think it's saying the Spirit-empowered church is able to do what he ultimately intended to do and did do, and it's done. And this is why never be surprised, as Sherry and I were talking about the other day, that when revival comes, don't be surprised you start seeing a lot of demons cast out. It's very interesting that when revival comes, demonic manifestation is quite common. It's not surprising to me that Mama Heidi Baker would go to northern Mozambique and to a place where they had never gotten a harvest, and she would challenge the witch doctors of an area. They came and she called them out in an evangelistic meeting, actually called them out to say if they were witch doctors, for them to come out and stand forward. She wanted to pray for them. And then she rebuked the spirits on these witch doctors. And some, I've heard these stories about how all these manifestations happen. A great deliverance happened. And from that time to this, a great harvest has been out of those 5 northern Muslim provinces of Mozambique. Why? Satan was cast out. And the Bible's constantly telling us our war, our battle is not with each other. It's not with people. It's with the devil. And so let's get refocused, church. Revelation chapter 12. If there's any passage that people know in the book of Revelation, it's this one. I heard a loud voice in heaven saying, now the salvation and the power and the kingdom of our God and the authority of his Christ, listen, have come. Now again, let's date it. When? When we got to the seventh trumpet. When? When we got to the place in the book of Revelation where we're told about the open heaven and the enthronement of the king. When a king is enthroned, kingdom is present. When kingdom is present, there's still conflict. Look what it says. And for the accuser of the brothers has been thrown down, who accuses them day and night before God, and they've conquered him. Revelation chapter 11, what did we see? We saw the conquest of the law and the prophets. We saw them defeated. We saw them killed. What did we see later? We saw them resurrected, ascended. What did we see next? The enthronement of Christ. What did we see next? A recapitulation of the birth story. What did we see next? The telling of the story of the plundering of the heavens and of the casting down of the serpent. And now what's happened? The war of the heavens comes down. And who's in it? We're in it. What happens? Now is salvation. We're living in the gospel era. This is the gospel era. From the time of Christ's glorious ascension to the time of his glorious consummation, it's the gospel era. You want to know what time it is? It's the gospel era. It's the time when the serpent is bound. It's the time when the gospel can be effectively proclaimed. Blind eyes can open. Deaf ears can open. Dead can be raised, both in the spirit and in the body. It's the time when we can effectively and effectually preach the gospel. What is the price? They've conquered him. Hallelujah. And they have conquered him by the blood of the Lamb, the word of their testimony. There's coming a time, and is now, when Christians in America, in the Western world, wherever they are, but I'm thinking especially of our specific context and situation, we're going to have to begin to declare with simplicity who we are, what we hold, why we hold it. We're going to have to say why we think marriage is what we think it is. We're going to have to say why we think the offspring, the children, are who we think they are, who God says they are, not what the social construct idea says they are. We're going to have to declare, why do you believe this? Because I'm a Christian. I'm a follower of Jesus. We literally, at the time, it's here. It's finally come. Your normal speech is going to be regarded as hateful speech. We're going to have to learn to give our testimony with simplicity and clarity and fearlessness. And people are going to lose jobs. But I don't want us to lose jobs because we're angry, fist-shaking, hateful people. I want us to lose jobs because we say, I will not and cannot submit to these commands you're giving me because my allegiance is to the one I follow. And whether you take my bread from my plate or my head from my shoulders, I have to follow him. The time is here. The time is now. They conquered him by the blood of the Lamb, the simple word of their testimony. For they loved not their lives even unto death. You know, we're at a time where people are going to say to you that the separation, here's what's happening. The separation of church and state is ultimately going to mean the separation of public and private life. And we're going to say, We're going to have to learn to say, I cannot confess what I do not believe. I cannot make your confessions. My confession is Jesus is Lord. My confession is man and woman in the image of God. My confession is marriage is a holy covenant between a man and a woman. My confession is that the offspring of the marriage covenant belong to their parents. My confession is the simplicity of my faith as a follower of Jesus. This is the ongoing part. This is the part that they had to go through. Now listen, there's an interesting kind of an interplay in the text that we have. It's an interplay between their safety and protection and their vulnerability and their death. And I find it interesting that at the moment when we're going to have more testimony than we have anywhere in the book of Revelation about God's protective care, we have the clear testimony that shedding our blood is not what we're trying to avoid. That having our lives taken from us is not our goal. Wait a minute. Protecting ourselves from having our lives taken from us is not our goal. All right, gospel warriors. The blood of the Lamb, it's the finished thing. The word of our testimony, simple. Jesus is Lord. They loved not their lives even unto death. The testimony of the early church has very much to do with martyrdom. But in this specific moment that's being spoken of, this moment when God brings a judgment on Jerusalem, there is also a word about the protection of his people. And that's what we come to. Therefore, rejoice, O heavens, and you who dwell in them. But woe to you, O earth and sea. Remember the woes? Rejoice, O heavens, and you who dwell in them. But woe to you, O earth and sea. And by the way, earth and sea going to become really, land and sea, going to become very significant in chapter 13. For the devil has come down to you with great wrath. We're just about to read about the great wrath of the enemy, because he knows that his time is short. And when the dragon saw that he had been thrown down to the earth, he pursued the woman. Because what? This woman image is still present. I told you this woman is those who bear the offspring and her offspring. In this case, the woman, the one who had given birth to the male child. This means it would have been the remnant of Israel, faithful Israel. Okay? Because Jesus is the seed of the woman. Israel was the nation that was given custody of the seed to deliver the seed down through the history, down through the years. And now we're dealing with the woman. We're not finished with her yet. Watch what it says about her. This covenant woman. But the woman was given the two wings of a great eagle so that she might fly from the serpent into the wilderness to the place where she's to be nourished for time and times and a half times. This is speaking of the protection of the woman during the time of the tribulation. All right? So, just give you those references if you want to sketch them down real quick. You can connect the woes. We had 7 trumpets and 3 woes. And what we find out now, we're not told this is the third woe. It's just given to us. It's just there. The first and second are enumerated, and this one is just spoken. Woe to you, O land and sea, for the devil's come down to you having great wrath, because he knows his time is short. All right, what's going on here? Verse 13 is the persecution. The persecution is now listen, the persecution that comes is the direct result of the defeat of the dragon by the Christ. He intends to destroy the people of God. Verse 14 is a new Exodus and a new world. Verse 14, but the woman was given 2 wings of the great eagle so she might fly from the serpent into the wilderness. This is a really fun kind of image that you probably have not seen before. The wings of the eagle is the sign of the Exodus. Because there it is, Exodus 19:4. You yourselves have seen what I did to the Egyptians and how I bore you on eagle's wings and brought you to myself. So God is saying through John that the same way he protected old Israel in the Exodus, he's protecting his new people, Jews and Gentiles. Now indeed, if you'll obey my voice and keep my covenant, you'll be my treasured possession among all the peoples of the earth, for all the earth is mine. And you shall be to me a kingdom of priests, a holy nation. These are the words that you shall speak to the people of Israel. Don't miss this. This is a fun little moment. Look at this. In Genesis 1, the earth was without form and void, and the darkness was over the face of the deep, and the Spirit of God was hovering over the face of the waters. What am I showing you? I'm showing you a picture of eagle's wings, just so you'll know. You have this phrase, without form and void, and you have this phrase, hovering. In the Hebrew language, this is the only place else where those 2 Hebrew words are used in the entire Old Covenant is Deuteronomy 32, where he's talking about the consummation of the covenant. He found him in a desert land and in the howling waste of the wilderness, and he encircled him and cared for him and kept him as the apple of his eye, like an eagle that stirs up its nest and flutters over its young, spreading out its wings and catching them on its pinions. What am I saying to you? Creation was a void and a hovering. The creation of God's people in this howling waste and fluttering over was literally a creation act of God creating a people for himself. And then this act, the act of preserving them, where the 2 wings of the great eagle so that she might fly from the serpent to the wilderness, to the place where she's to be nourished. This is recreation. All the way through the book of Revelation, we have these pictures of God keeping his covenant and of recreation. I'm almost done. What's being referred to in this passage is the snatching of God's remnant out of Israel and taking them away into the wilderness and preserving them. He said it specifically in the Olivet Discourse. I'm pretty much out of time to read that, but it's in Matthew 24, what is that, 15 through, you can see it better than I probably. I think it's 28. All right. I did make a highlight for false Christ and false prophets will arise and perform signs and wonders so as to lead astray if possible, even the elect. And Josephus talks about the false Christs and false prophets during the time of the Roman wars. So this stuff is very well attested to. We're almost done. The serpent poured water like a river out of his mouth after the woman to sweep her away from the flood. With a flood, the earth came to help the woman. And the earth opened its mouth and swallowed the river that the dragon had poured from its mouth. Then the dragon became furious with the woman and went off to make war with the rest of her offspring on those who keep the commandments of God and hold the testimony of Jesus. And I like this. And then he stood on the sand of the sea. It's a pregnant moment. If it was a movie, there would be a commercial at this point. But what is this a picture of? There's the need for help, and there's the help. This recapitulates the flight from Pharaoh. He started off trying to drown the Hebrew male children. Remember, he pursued them after the Passover. And remember, he counts on the sea to be their barrier, the earth opening. I don't think, one of my teachers said it could refer to the thing in Numbers. I think it just simply refers to the fact that the sea opened and they crossed on dry land. So what I'm saying is that this picture of the preservation of the woman and of her woman and her offspring, this picture of their protection, this is the picture of, again, that escape of the remnant of faithful Israel out of Jerusalem at the time of that judgment and his protection over them. And then we get this word that he's still coming for the rest of them. What is that? The serpent now turns on the rest of the offspring. The war, that chapter of the war closes, but yes, the book of Revelation is there to say to us that the war is still on. No, therefore, we needed that word, that the blood of the Lamb, the word of their testimony, and because they loved not their lives even unto death. And I did it. I finished before 7. So if you're joining us online, it's time for me to relinquish my space to the rest of my church. Thank you. We're glad you joined us. Be back next week. We'll go into chapter 13 and we will look at Leviathan and Behemoth. May the Lord bless you and keep you. Amen.